Address given by Frederick Douglass at Corinthian Hall, Rochester, New York, July 5, 1852. This, for the purpose of this celebration, is the 4th of July. It is the birthday of your national independence and of your political freedom. This to you is what the Passover was to the emancipated people of God. It carries your minds back to the day and to the act of your great deliverance, and to the signs and to the wonders associated with that act and that day. This celebration also marks the beginning of another year of your national life. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you this day rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. What to the American slave is the 4th of July? I answer, a day that reveals to him, more than all other days in the year, the gross injustice and cruelty to which he is the constant victim. To him, your celebration is a sham, your boasted liberty an unholy license, your national greatness swelling vanity. Notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. While drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions, my spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age. The fiat of the Almighty, "Let there be light," has not yet spent its force. No abuse, no outrage, whether in taste, sport, or avarice, can now hide itself from the all-pervading light. Hi, I'm Sean Munger. I'm a historian. I have a PhD in American history, and my niche here on YouTube is doing deep dive, context-heavy videos on various historical subjects. This video is a little different than some of my others, and if you'll bear with me for just a few minutes, I think it's worth a bit of explanation. This video is the story of the American Revolution and the American Revolutionary era, but although you'll hear my voice throughout it, very few of the words in this video are my own. This is the story of the American Revolution told almost entirely through the words of the people who lived through it, or remembered it, or had something to do with it. This is not just a recitation of the founding documents, though yes, the Declaration of Independence is in here, as are some other major highlights you may be familiar with. This video is compiled from the stories of many, many people, some famous, some not. George Washington, Ben Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine. Yes, they were part of the American Revolution, and I'll read some of their words. But you'll hear from a lot of others too that you've probably never heard of, and see some of the events of the Revolution through their eyes, like Elizabeth Liechtenstein Johnson, a laundress who witnessed the British surrender at Yorktown, or Dr. Albigence Waldo, a Continental Army surgeon who wrote of hunger and privation at Valley Forge. These are real people who lived and died 200 or 250 years ago. I included them because it's too easy, especially for Americans, to see the major participants of the Revolution as bronze or marble models, larger than life, and their deeds a sort of hagiography, more mythology than history. Americans love to mythologize the Revolution. But it was an era experienced by real people, ordinary people, with life experiences as real as ours are in the 21st century. Through these accounts, I hope to shape the larger picture of what happened in North America between 1760 and 1790. Not just the war or the political events that made their way into our public consciousness, but the whole long and complex era of the Revolution, which itself was embedded in a larger global context. Doubtless some of the stories I've picked here will surprise you or may confuse you. Well, why did he pick that one? Why didn't he pick this other one that I know or heard about? There's a method to my madness here. In the last century, particularly from the 1950s up until the 200th anniversary of the American Revolutionary War in the 1970s, the subject of the American Revolution was heavily promoted by popular historians as kind of a heroic narrative. Some of these old books compiling the accounts of the Revolution are great, and I've used some of them in creating this video. In more recent times, historians have tried to flesh out a more complete view of the Revolutionary era, one which includes the voices of enslaved people, women, Loyalists, Native Americans, religious minorities, and some of those who the historians of the 1950s and 60s might have judged as being on the wrong side of history. I've included some of those voices too. The Revolution was about slavery and women and Loyalists and Native Americans, as much as it was about, as this old book says, rebels and redcoats. The story is not military focused. Yes, there are a couple of accounts of battles and military engagements mixed in here, because military conflict definitely was a part of the Revolution, but it's only a small part of the story. There's a much broader picture that I want you to see. This video is different than my others because I'm not going to tell you what these stories all mean. I'm not going to interpret them or present an argument or tell you what I think it's all about. You're going to have to figure out those answers for yourself. But be assured, all the words you'll hear in this video are as accurate as I can render them. At the beginning of each segment, I'll identify who is speaking, and a caption will tell you what it's about or other important information. Now, this isn't a permanent change in my video style. I'm doing it just for this one, but I did want to give you a heads up as to how this particular video differs from some of my others. The visuals in this video aren't just filler. In addition to images of the Revolution itself, not always accurate, this one, which was actually plagiarized by Paul Revere, is one of the most famous, or this one, which depicts a scene that never actually happened the way this picture shows it. We'll be visiting some of the geographical sites where the Revolution took place or are associated with the era. As you know, my videos are often heavily geographical and I use Google Earth a lot. Even though I may not call out these places specifically in the narration, as I often do, you'll see them on the screen. Now, I'm aware that a lot of my fans and subscribers get most of the value from my videos by listening to them. That's fine, and you'll certainly be able to do that with this one. But there are valuable things in the visuals as well, other layers of context and meaning that might not be necessarily apparent from the words alone. The genesis of this video was a class that I taught years ago about the American Revolution, first at the university level and then online for a group of private subscribers. One of my first online classes, in fact. University bookstores are a huge and dishonest racket, and I didn't want my students to have to pay a bunch of money for books that they might not even read, or maybe would read once the night before the final. So, instead of assigning a textbook, I compiled a packet of primary source documents that served as the main way we tackled and interpreted the Revolutionary era. The packet cost $6, which was entirely the cost of Xeroxing it. Here it is. The university bookstore didn't make a dime on it, and I'm proud of that. Some of the documents in this video were printed in it, but I've also expanded considerably beyond it with additional research. When I decided to do this video, I thought, well, why not just throw out all the essays, the analysis, the interpretation, and boil it down to the primary documents themselves. That's why this video is called The American Revolution in its own words. That's what it's going to be, exactly what it says on the tin. Except for the intro and outro and a brief intermission, you won't see me again for the next 2 hours or so. Do keep in mind that the words in this video were mostly written in the 18th and 19th centuries, so it sounds a bit different than the kind of English we're used to. And the people writing these words tended to be more verbose and dramatic in their speech and writing than we usually are today. Those of you listening to me in another language or following along with the subtitles Honestly, I don't know how it's going to go. There is a members section on my channel, and as usual, there will be a members-only version of this video, ad-free, with some expanded content that you won't see on the free version, particularly documents relating to how the British reacted to the Revolution. For example, the secret abdication statement of King George III from 1782, which he was persuaded not to use. I taught a university-level class on the American Revolution, and I didn't know that that document existed until I started the research for this video. I suppose it wouldn't be one of my videos without a few of my little trademarks, the word Michigas, the arrow, and the clown horn. The phrase, remember that, it becomes important later, and me telling you to go watch cat videos if you get mad at me for some reason. So, there you go, we got all of that out of the way. This video is being made in mid-2025, just after the 250th anniversary of the beginning of the military phase of the Revolution at the battles of Lexington and Concord. I suspect it'll still be up on my channel a year from now, when the United States celebrates the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. Although the events of the Revolutionary era happened that long ago, the meaning of the Revolution itself changes for every generation that encounters it. The lessons we draw from it, the promises, whether fulfilled or not, the implications of its ideals, its contradictions, from all men are created equal to the 3/5 compromise. The meaning of the Revolution constantly changes over time. There is no definitive interpretation of the American Revolution. Its story is not the property of anyone. It doesn't belong to me or to you or to Thomas Jefferson or to Americans with particular beliefs. It's a messy, complicated, contradictory, and confusing story. It may inspire you, it may make you furious, it may do both. That's what history is meant to do. In a few minutes, we'll begin. I hope you enjoy and learn from this journey. Thanks. Funny thing, while I was diving into the research for this video, looking up some obscure passage in one of these old books, I got a text message from some number I didn't recognize. It was from some fake employment agency pretending to offer me a job. Obviously a scam. I get these a lot. Also, the randos pretending to be beautiful women, usually with photos of supermodels stolen off the internet, trying to bait me into crypto scams. Where do they get my number? They get it from companies called data brokers. They are unfortunately legal, but they've got no qualms about selling your personal information to, among others, Russian mobsters in St. Petersburg, well, hello again, Vlad, or human traffickers working out of office towers in Cambodia. The data brokers are legally required to remove your information if you ask them, but they make it really hard to figure out how to do that. I recently got hooked up with Aura, the sponsor of this video, and I'm impressed with what they can do to help. Aura is an all-in-one digital security service. They take care of the hard and agonizing parts of digital security by making it easy to request removal from data broker sites, the kind of stuff that I don't know how to do on my own, and which would take way too much time to learn, time that I could be spending making these deep dive videos. Aura has a lot of great services. They'll alert you if your personal info winds up on the dark web. They give you real-time fraud alerts on your credit and bank accounts. They monitor your information 24/7 to help prevent identity theft. They've got a secure VPN, antivirus software, a password manager, an extension for Google Chrome, and all kinds of stuff that'll help you keep your private information private. If your information does get stolen and you suffer losses, Aura has up to $5 million in identity theft insurance protection. They also have fraud experts available round the clock, at least in the US. Skeptical? Well, I was too. But when I tried Aura, I was impressed from the get-go. You can try Aura free for 14 days by going to a special link for my viewers, aura.com/SeanMunger. During those 2 weeks, you'll see where your data is being exposed and sold, and you can start doing something about it. Aura can help get your data out of the greasy little claws of Russian mobsters and Cambodian crime lords. Since I started using them, the number of fake job offer and pig butcher texts I've gotten has gone way down, and I feel like I'm actually doing something to protect myself. So, thanks to Aura for sponsoring the video. Now, let's get on with the American Revolution era. Olaudah Equiano, the life of Olaudah Equiano, also known as Gustavus Vasa. The first object which saluted my eyes when I arrived on the coast was the sea, and a slave ship which was then riding at anchor and waiting for its cargo. These filled me with astonishment, which was soon converted into terror when I was carried aboard. I was immediately handled and tossed up to see if I were sound by some of the crew, and I was now persuaded that I had gotten into a world of bad spirits, and that they were going to kill me. When I looked around the ship too and saw a large furnace or copper boiling, and a multitude of black people of every description chained together, every one of their countenances expressing dejection and sorrow, I no longer doubted of my fate, and, quite overpowered with horror and anguish, I fell motionless on the deck and fainted. I was soon put down under the decks, and there I received such a salutation in my nostrils as I had never experienced in my life, so that with the loathsomeness of the stench and crying together, I became so sick and low that I was not able to eat, nor had I the least desire to taste anything. I now wished for the last friend, death, to relieve me. But soon, to my grief, 2 of the white men offered me eatables, and on my refusing to eat, one of them held me fast by the hands and laid me across, I think, the windlass, and tied my feet, while the other flogged me severely. In a little time after, amongst the poor chained men, I found some of my own nation, which in a small degree gave ease to my mind. I inquired of these what was to be done with us. They gave me to understand we were to be carried to these white people's country to work for them. The stench of the hold while we were on the coast was so intolerably loathsome that it was dangerous to remain there for any time, and some of us had been permitted to stay on the deck for the fresh air. But now that the whole ship's cargo was confined together, it became absolutely pestilential. The closeness of the space and the heat of the climate added to the number in the ship, which was so crowded that each had scarcely room to turn himself, almost suffocated us. This produced copious perspiration, so that the air soon became unfit for respiration, from a variety of loathsome smells, and brought on a sickness among the slaves, of which many died, thus falling victims to the improvident avarice, as I may call it, of their purchasers. This wretched situation was again aggravated by the galling of the chains, now become insupportable, and the filth of the necessary tubs, into which the children often fell, and were almost suffocated. The shrieks of the women and the groans of the dying rendered the whole scene a horror almost inconceivable. Happily, perhaps, for myself, I was soon reduced so low here that it was thought necessary to keep me almost always on deck, and from my extreme youth I was not put in fetters. At last we came in sight of the island of Barbados, at which the whites on board gave a great shout and made many signs of joy to us. We did not know what to think of this, but as the vessel drew nearer, we plainly saw the harbor and other ships of different kinds and sizes, and we soon anchored amongst them off Bridgetown. Many merchants and planters now came aboard, though it was in the evening. They put us in separate parcels and examined us attentively. They also made us jump and pointed to the land, signifying we were to go there. I stayed in this island for a few days. I believe it could not be above a fortnight, and when I and some few more slaves that were not saleable among the rest, from very much fretting, we were shipped off in a sloop for North America. We were landed up a river a good way from the sea, about Virginia country, where we saw few or none of our native Africans, and not one soul who could talk to me. I was a few weeks weeding grass and gathering stones in a plantation, and at last all my companions were distributed different ways, and only myself was left. I was now exceedingly miserable, and thought myself worse off than any of the rest of my companions, for they could talk to each other, but I had no person to speak to that I could understand. In this state I was constantly grieving and pining, and wishing for death rather than anything else. While I was in this plantation, the gentleman to whom I suppose the estate belonged, being unwell, I was one day sent for to his dwelling house to fan him. When I came into the room where he was, I was very much affrighted at some things I saw, and the more so as I had seen a black woman slave as I came through the house, who was cooking the dinner, and the poor creature was cruelly loaded with various kinds of iron machines. She had one particularly on her head, which locked her mouth so fast that she could scarcely speak and could not eat or drink. I was much astonished and shocked at this contrivance, which I afterwards learned was called the iron muzzle. Soon after I had a fan put into my hand to fan the gentleman while he slept, and so I did indeed with great fear. In this state of anxiety I remained till my master awoke, when I was dismissed out of the room, to my no small satisfaction and relief, for I thought that these people were all made up of wonders. In this place I was called Jacob, but on board the ship I was called Michael. When I refused to answer to my new name, which at first I did, it gained me many a cuff, so at length I submitted, and was obliged to bear the present name, by which I have been known ever since. Virginia Gazette, Williamsburg, September 14th, 1769. Runaway from the subscriber. In Albemarle, a mulatto slave called Sandy, about 35 years of age. His stature is rather low, inclining to corpulence, and his complexion light. He is a shoemaker by trade, in which he uses his left hand principally, can do coarse carpenter's work, and is something of a horse jockey. He is greatly addicted to drink, and when drunk is insolent and disorderly. In his conversation he swears much, and in his behavior is artful and knavish. Whoever conveys the said slave to me in Albemarle shall have 40 shillings reward, if taken up within the county, £4 if elsewhere within the colony, and £10 in any other colony. From Thomas Jefferson. The account of a sergeant major in the Louisburg Grenadiers, British Army, September 1759. On the 14th we landed at break of day and immediately attacked and routed the enemy. We then took post on the plains of Abraham, whither Monsieur Montcalm, on hearing that we had landed, for he did not expect us, hastened with his whole army, consisting of cavalry as well as infantry, to give us battle. About 9 o'clock we observed the enemy marching down towards us in 3 columns. At 10 they formed their line of battle, which was at least 6 deep, having their flanks covered by a thick wood on each side, into which they threw above 3,000 Canadians and Indians, who galled us much. The regulars then marched briskly up to us, and gave us their first fire at about 50 yards distance, which we did not return, as it was General Wolfe's express orders not to fire till they came within 20 yards of us. The enemy lost in the engagement Lieutenant General Montcalm, who was torn to pieces by our grape shot, 2 brigadier generals, 1 colonel, 2 lieutenant colonels, and at least 150 officers and men killed, and 200 taken prisoners at their very sally ports, of which 58 were officers. On our side was killed the brave and never to be forgotten General Wolfe, with 9 officers, 4 sergeants, and 44 privates. Wounded, Brigadier General Monckton, Colonel Carleton, Quartermaster General, Major Barr, Adjutant General, and 50 other officers, with 26 sergeants and 557 privates. This action was the more glorious, as the enemy were at least 12,000 strong, besides 500 horse, whereas we at the utmost did not consist of above 3,500, some of whom did not engage, whereas our whole army, at our first embarking at Louisburg, did not exceed 8,240 men. King George III of Great Britain, October 7th, 1763. Whereas we have taken into our royal consideration the extensive and valuable acquisitions in America, secured to our crown by the late definitive treaty of peace, concluded at Paris the 10th day of February last, we have thought fit, with the advice of our Privy Council, to issue this, our royal proclamation. And whereas it is just and reasonable and essential to our interest and the security of our colonies that the several nations or tribes of Indians with whom we are connected and who live under our protection should not be molested or disturbed in the possession of such parts of our dominions and territories as, not having been ceded to or purchased by us, are reserved to them or any of them as their hunting grounds. And we do hereby strictly forbid, on pain of our displeasure, all our loving subjects from making any purchases or settlements whatever, or taking possession of any of the lands above reserved, without our especial leave and license for that purpose first obtained. And we do further strictly enjoin and require all persons whatever who have either willfully or inadvertently ceded themselves upon any lands within the countries above described, or upon any other lands, which, not having been ceded to or purchased by us, are still reserved to the said Indians, as aforesaid, forthwith to remove themselves from such settlements. Given at our court at St. James's, the 7th day of October, 1763, in the 3rd year of our reign. God save the King. British Parliament, Order in Council on the Reform of the Customs Service, 1763. We, the Commissioners of Your Majesty's Treasury, beg leave humbly to represent to Your Majesty that having taken into consideration the present state of the duties of customs imposed on Your Majesty's subjects in America and the West Indies, we find that the revenue arising therefrom is very small and inconsiderable, having in no degree increased with the commerce of those countries, and is not yet sufficient to defray a 4th part of the expense necessary for collecting it. We observe with concern that through neglect, connivance, and fraud, not only the revenue is impaired, but the commerce of the colonies is diverted from its natural course, and the provisions of many wise laws to secure it to the mother country are in great measure defeated. We have directed that all the officers of the revenue in Your Majesty's plantations should be furnished with new and ample instructions, enforcing in the strongest manner the strictest attention to their duty, and requiring that by regular and constant correspondence they give an account as well of their own proceedings as of the conduct of the officers under them, and inform us likewise of any obstructions they may meet, and to make such a disposition of the force under their respective commands as will be most serviceable in suppressing these dangerous practices, and in protecting the officers of the revenue from the violence of any desperate and lawless persons. George Washington, Letter to William Crawford, a Western Surveyor, September 17, 1767. Dear Sir, I desired the favor of you to look me out a tract of about 1,500, 2,000 or more acres, somewhere in your neighborhood, meaning only by this that it might be as contiguous to your own settlement. Whatever trouble or expense you may be engaged in on my behalf, you may depend upon being thankfully repaid. The other matter just now hinted at, and which I proposed in my last, is to join you in attempting to secure some of the most valuable lands in the King's part, which I think may be accomplished after a while, notwithstanding the proclamation that restrains it at present and prohibits the settling of them at all. For I can never look upon that proclamation in any other light, but this I say between ourselves, than as a temporary expedient to quiet the minds of the Indians, and must fall, of course, in a few years. I would recommend it to you to keep this whole matter a profound secret, or trust it only with those in whom you can confide and who can assist you in bringing it to bear by their discoveries of land. And this advice proceeds from several very good reasons, and in the first place, because I might be censured for the opinion I have given in respect to the King's proclamation. And then, if the scheme I am now proposing to you was known, it might give the alarm to others, and by putting them upon a plan of the same nature, before we could lay a proper foundation for success ourselves. I am desirous of knowing in time how you approve of the scheme. I am, dear sir, your very humble servant, George Washington. Act of Parliament of Great Britain, March 22nd, 1765. Whereas, by an act made in the last session of Parliament, several duties were granted, continued, and appropriated towards defraying the expenses of defending, protecting, and securing the British colonies and plantations in America, and whereas it is first necessary that provision be made for raising a further revenue within your Majesty's dominions in America towards defraying said expenses, that from and after the 1st day of November, 1765, there shall be raised, levied, collected, and paid unto his Majesty, 1. For every skin of vellum or parchment or sheet or piece of paper on which shall be engrossed, written, or printed any declaration, plea, replication, rejoinder, demurrer, or other pleading, or any copy thereof, in any court for every skin or piece of vellum or parchment or sheet or piece of paper on which for every skin or piece of vellum or parchment or sheet or piece of paper on which may be engrossed, written, or printed, 53. For every skin or piece of vellum or parchment and 6pence, a stamp duty of 3 pence, a stamp duty of double the amount of the respective duties before charged thereon. Finally, the produce of all the aforementioned duties shall be paid into his Majesty's treasury, and there held in reserve to be used from time to time by the Parliament for the purpose of defraying the expenses necessary for the defense, protection, and security of the said colonies and plantations. Letter from David Colden, Royal Customs Official to the Commissioners of the Stamp Office at Fort George, New York, October 26, 1765. I think it unnecessary to enter into a particular detail of the violent, licentious measures that have been taken here to prevent a submission to the Stamp Act. The gentlemen who have been driven to resign their offices that they might preserve their property and persons will very probably have been particular on this head. Papers daily spread among the people, exciting them to destroy the houses, persons, and effects of whoever sells or buys a stamp. This has occasioned so universal a dread that I am well assured no man of property in this place could now be prevailed on to take the smallest part in executing the act. Letter from Cadwallader Colden to H.S. Conway, New York City, November 5th, 1765. On the evening of the first day of this month, the mob began to collect together, and after it became dark, they came up to the fort gate, a number of boys carrying torches and a scaffold on which two images were placed, one to represent the governor in his gray hairs, and the other the devil by his side. The scaffold with the images was brought up within 8 or 10 feet of the fort gate, with the grossest rivalry from the mob. As they went from the gate, they broke open my coach house, took my chariot out of it, and carried it round the town with the images, and returned to the fort gate, from whence they carried them to an open place, where they erected a gibbet within 100 yards of the fort gate. There hung up the images. While this was doing, a great number of gentlemen of the town, if they can be called so, stood around to observe this outrage on their king's governor. The garrison was at the same time on the ramparts, with preparations sufficient to have destroyed them, but not a single return was made, in words or otherwise, from any man in the fort while this egregious insult was performing. I hope by the next packet to give a better account of this province than I can do at present, and to convince you of my regard to my duty in the commission I have the honor to bear. I am, with the greatest respect, sir. Resolutions adopted by delegates of 9 of 13 colonies at Federal Hall, New York City, October 25th, 1765. The members of this Congress, sincerely devoted with the warmest sentiments of affection and duty to His Majesty's person and government, esteem it our indispensable duty to make the following declarations of our humble opinion respecting the most essential rights and liberties of the colonists, and of the grievances under which they labor, by reason of several late acts of Parliament. That it is inseparably essential to the freedom of a people and the undoubted right of Englishmen that no taxes be imposed on them, but with their own consent, given personally or by their representatives. That the only representatives of the people of these colonies are persons chosen therein by themselves, and that no taxes ever have been or can be constitutionally imposed on them, but by their respective legislatures. That the duties imposed by several late acts of Parliament from the peculiar circumstances of these colonies will be extremely burdensome and grievous, and from the scarcity of specie, the payment of them absolutely impracticable. Lastly, that it is the indispensable duty of these colonies, to the best of sovereigns, to the mother country, and to themselves, to endeavor by a loyal and dutiful address to His Majesty, and humble applications to both Houses of Parliament, to procure the repeal of the Act, for granting and applying certain stamp duties, all clauses of any other acts of Parliament whereby the jurisdiction of the Admiralty is extended as aforesaid, and of the other late acts for the restriction of American commerce. Transcript of the examination of Benjamin Franklin before the House of Commons, February 1766.
What is your name and place of abode?
Franklin of Philadelphia.
Do the Americans pay any considerable taxes among themselves?
Certainly many, and very heavy taxes.
Are not all the people very able to pay those taxes?
No. The frontier counties all along the continent, having been frequently ravaged by the enemy and greatly impoverished, are able to pay very little tax. And therefore, in consideration of their distresses, our late tax laws do expressly favor those counties, excusing the sufferers, and I suppose the same is done in other governments.
Are not the colonies, from their circumstances, very able to pay the stamp duty?
In my opinion, there is not gold and silver enough in the colonies to pay the stamp duty for 1 year.
Don't you know that the money arising from the stamps was all to be laid out in America?
I know it is appropriated by the Act to the American service, but it will be spent in the conquered colonies where the soldiers are, not in the colonies that pay it.
Is there not a balance of trade due from the colonies where the troops are posted that will bring back the money to the old colonies?
I think not. I believe very little would come back. I know of no trade likely to bring it back. I think it would come from the colonies where it was spent directly to England, for I have always observed that in every colony, the more plenty the means of remittance to England, the more goods are sent for, and the more trade with England carried on.
Do you think it right that America should be protected by this country and pay no part of the expense?
That is not the case. The colonies raised, clothed, and paid during the last war nearly 25,000 men and spent many millions.
Were you not reimbursed by Parliament?
We were only reimbursed what, in your opinion, we had advanced beyond our proportion, or beyond what might reasonably be expected from us, and it was a very small part of what we spent. Pennsylvania, in particular, dispersed about 500,000 pounds, and the reimbursements in the whole did not exceed 60,000 pounds.
Do not you think the people of America would submit to pay the stamp duty if it was moderated?
No, never, unless compelled by force of arms.
How is the assembly composed? Of what kinds of people are the members? Landholders or traders?
It is composed of landholders, merchants, and artificers.
Are not the majority landholders?
I believe they are.
What was the temper of America towards Great Britain before the year 1763?
The best in the world. They submitted willingly to the government of the crown and paid in their courts obedience to acts of parliament. Numerous as the people are in the several old provinces, they cost you nothing in forts, citadels, garrisons, or armies to keep them in subjection. They were governed by this country at the expense of only a little pen, ink, and paper. They were led by a thread.
And what is their temper now?
Oh, very much altered.
Did you ever hear the authority of Parliament to make laws for America questioned till lately?
The authority of Parliament was allowed to be valid in all laws, except as such should lay internal taxes. It was never disputed in laying duties to regulate commerce.
Don't you think they would submit to the Stamp Act if it was modified, the obnoxious parts taken out, and the duty reduced to some particulars of small moment?
No, they will never submit to it.
What is your opinion of a future tax imposed on the same principle with that of the Stamp Act? How would the Americans receive it?
Just as they do this, they would not pay it.
Have not you heard the resolutions of this House, and of the House of Lords, asserting the right of Parliament relating to America, including a power to tax the people there?
Yes, I've heard of such resolutions.
What will be the opinion of the Americans on those resolutions?
They will think them unconstitutional and unjust.
Was it an opinion in America before 1763 that the Parliament had no right to lay taxes and duties there?
I never heard any objection to the right of laying duties to regulate commerce, but a right to lay internal taxes was never supposed to be in Parliament, as we are not represented there.
On what do you found your opinion that the people in America made any such distinction?
I know that whenever the subject has occurred in conversation where I've been present, it has appeared to be the opinion of everyone that we could not be taxed in a parliament where we were not represented. But the payment of duties laid by Act of Parliament as regulations of commerce was never disputed.
You say the colonies have always submitted to external taxes, and object to the right of Parliament only in laying internal taxes. Now can you show that there is any kind of difference between the two taxes on the colony on which they may be laid?
I think the difference is very great. An external tax is a duty laid on commodities imported. That duty is added to the first cost and other charges on the commodity, and when it is offered to sale, makes a part of the price. If the people do not like it at that price, they refuse it, and they are not obliged to pay it. But an internal tax is forced from the people without their consent, if not laid by their own representatives. The Stamp Act says we shall have no commerce, make no exchange of property with each other, neither purchase nor grant nor recover debts. We shall neither marry nor make our wills, unless we pay such and such sums. And thus it is intended to extort our money from us, or ruin us, by the consequences of refusing to pay it.
Did the Americans ever dispute the controlling power of Parliament to regulate the commerce?
No.
Can anything less than a military force carry the Stamp Act into execution?
I do not see how a military force could be applied to that purpose.
Why may it not?
Well, suppose a military force sent into America, they will find nobody in arms. What are they then to do? They cannot force a man to take stamps who chooses to do without them. They will not find a rebellion. They may indeed make one.
If the Stamp Act should be repealed, would not the Americans think they could oblige the Parliament to repeal every external tax law now in force?
It is hard to answer questions of what people at such a distance will think.
But what do you imagine they will think were the motives of repealing the Act?
I suppose they'll think that it was repealed from a conviction of its inexpediency, and they will rely upon it. While the same inexpediency subsists, you will never attempt to make such another.
Was not the late war with the Indians, since the peace with France, a war for America only?
Yes, it was more particularly for America than the former, but it was rather a consequence or remains of the former war, the Indians not having been thoroughly pacified, and the Americans bore much of the greatest share of the expense. It was put an end to by the army under General Bouquet. There were not above 300 regulars in that army and above 1,000 Pennsylvanians.
If the Stamp Act should be repealed, would it induce the assemblies of America to acknowledge the rights of Parliament to tax them, and would they erase their resolutions?
No, never.
Are there no means of obliging them to erase those resolutions?
None that I know of. They will never do it, unless compelled by force of arms.
Is there a power on earth that can force them to erase them?
No power, how great soever, can force men to change their opinions. Act of Parliament, March 18, 1766. Whereas an act was passed in the last session of Parliament entitled An Act for Granting and Applying Certain Stamp Duties and Other Duties in the British Colonies and Plantations in America towards further defraying the expenses of defending, protecting, and securing the same. Whereas the continuance of the said act would be attended with many inconveniences and may be productive of consequences greatly detrimental to the commercial interests of these kingdoms, be it enacted by the King's most excellent majesty, that the above-mentioned act is hereby repealed. Whereas several of the Houses of Representatives in His Majesty's colonies and plantations in America have, of late, against law, claimed to themselves and passed certain votes, resolutions, and orders derogatory to the legislative authority of Parliament. Parliament assembled hath, and of right ought to have, full power and authority to make laws and statutes of sufficient force and validity to bind the colonies and the people of America. All resolutions, votes, orders, and proceedings in any of the said colonies or plantations, whereby the power and authority of the Parliament of Great Britain to make laws and statutes as aforesaid is denied or drawn into question, are utterly null and void to all intents and purposes whatsoever. A short narrative of the horrid massacre, printed in Boston, 1770. At the end of the late war, in which this province bore so distinguished a part, a happy union subsisted between Great Britain and the colonies. This was unfortunately interrupted by the Stamp Act, but it was in some measure restored by the repeal of it. It was again interrupted by other acts of Parliament for taxing America, and by the appointment of a Board of Commissioners. While the town was surrounded by a considerable number of His Majesty's ships of war, 2 regiments landed and took possession of it, and to support them 2 other regiments arrived sometime after from Ireland, one of which landed at Castle Island and the other in the town. There was a general combination among the soldiers of the 29th Regiment at least to commit some extraordinary act of violence upon the town. The officer on guard was Captain Preston, who with 7 or 8 soldiers with firearms and charged bayonets issued from the guardhouse, and in great haste posted himself and his soldiers in front of the custom house near the corner aforesaid. In passing to this station, the soldiers pushed several persons with their bayonets, driving through the people in so rough a manner that it appeared they intended to create a disturbance. This occasioned some snowballs to be thrown at them, which seems to have been the only provocation that was given. The said party was formed into a half circle, and within a short time after they had been posted at the custom house, began to fire among the people. Captain Preston is said to have ordered them to fire, and to have repeated that order. 1 gun was fired first, then others in succession, and with deliberation till 10 or a dozen guns were fired, or till that number of discharges were made from the guns which were fired, by which means 11 persons were killed and wounded, as above represented. A fair account of the late unhappy disturbance at Boston, printed in London, 1770. About 9 o'clock, Edward Hills, being among the mob near the townhouse at Boston, when the bells were set a-ringing to bring the people together, heard some of them say they would go down to the custom house, where there was a sentry placed. In the meantime, the mob surrounded the sentry and began to attack him by striking at him with clubs, swearing they would be revenged on the soldiers. The sentry defended himself as well as he could with his bayonet and desired to keep them off. They did not, however, desist, but pelted him with sticks and large pieces of ice picked up from the streets. The people, however, continued to defy him, telling him to fire and be damned. In a few minutes, a party of 12 soldiers, headed by Captain Preston, came to him from the main guard, with their arms in a horizontal posture and their bayonets fixed. They drew up immediately before the door of the custom house, with their faces towards the people, and held their guns breast high in order to defend the sentinel. But the people continued to insult and defy this party of soldiers in the same manner as they had done the single sentinel, pelting him with sticks and balls of ice, and calling out to them, "Damn you, you rascals! Fire! You dare not fire!" A large stick, or as Mr. Palm says, a piece of ice that was thrown at a grenadier on the right of the party, struck him with violence and made him stagger, upon which both he and the soldier next to him fired their pieces without any order from Captain Preston for that purpose, and soon after the rest of the party did the same, by which 3 men were killed on the spot and 8 wounded, of whom 2 have since died of their wounds. This is the whole of what the Boston narrative calls the horrid massacre. How far it deserves that appellation, let the unprejudiced reader judge. John Adams, Diary, December 17th, 1773. Last night, 3 cargoes of Bohea tea were emptied into the sea. This morning, a man-of-war sails. This is the most magnificent movement of all. There is a dignity, a majesty, a sublimity in this last effort of the Patriots that I greatly admire. The people should never rise without doing something to be remembered, something notable and striking. This destruction of the tea is so bold, so daring, so firm, intrepid, and inflexible, and it must have so important consequences and so lasting that I can't but consider it as an epoch in history. The question is whether the destruction of this tea was necessary. I apprehend it was, absolutely and indispensably so. They could not send it back. It could not get by the castle, the men of war, etc. Then there was no other alternative but to destroy it or let it be landed. To let it be landed would be giving up the principle of taxation by parliamentary authority, against which the continent have struggled for 10 years. Deacon Palmer and Mr. Isaiah Smith dined with me, and Mr. Trumbull came in. They say the Tories blame the consignees, much as the Whigs do, and say that the governor will lose his place for not taking the tea into his protection before. Lord North, Prime Minister of Great Britain, rises in Parliament during the debate on the Coercive Acts, 1774. I do not consider this matter of regulation to be taking away their charters in such a manner as is represented. It is a regulation of government to assist the crown. It appears to me to be not a matter of political expediency, but of necessity. The Americans have tarred and feathered your subjects, plundered your merchants, burnt your ships, denied all obedience to your laws and authority. Yet so clement and forbearing has our conduct been that it is incumbent upon us now to take a different course. Whatever may be the consequence, we must risk something. If we do not, all is over. Proceedings of the Continental Congress, meeting at Philadelphia, October 20th, 1774. We, His Majesty's most loyal subjects, the delegates of the several colonies of New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, the 3 lower counties of Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex on Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, deputed to represent them in a Continental Congress held in the city of Philadelphia on the 5th day of September, 1774. We are of the opinion that a non-importation, non-consumption, and non-exportation agreement, faithfully adhered to, will prove the most speedy, effectual, and peaceable measure and therefore we firmly agree and associate as follows. That from and after the first day of December next, we will not import into British America, from Great Britain or Ireland, any goods, wares, or merchandise whatsoever, or from any other place, any such goods, wares, or merchandise as shall have been exported from Great Britain or Ireland. We will neither import nor purchase any slave imported after the first day of December next, after which time we will wholly discontinue the slave trade, and will neither be concerned in it ourselves, nor will we hire our vessels, nor sell our commodities or manufactures to those who are concerned in it. The earnest desire we have not to injure our fellow subjects in Great Britain, Ireland, or the West Indies induces us to suspend a non-exportation until the 10th day of September, 1775, at which time, if the said acts and parts of acts of the British Parliament are not repealed, we will not, directly or indirectly, export any merchandise or commodity whatsoever to Great Britain, Ireland, or the West Indies, except rice to Europe. We recommend it to the provincial conventions and to the committees in the respective colonies to establish such farther regulations as they may think proper for carrying into execution this association. Essay on Slavery by Caesar Sartor, a former slave in Massachusetts, published in the Essex Journal and Merrimack Packet, August 17, 1774. As this is a time of great anxiety and distress among you, on account of the infringement not only of your charter rights, but of the natural rights and privileges of freeborn men, permit a poor, though freeborn African, who in his youth was trepanned into slavery, to tell you, and from that experience, that as slavery is the greatest, and consequently most to be dreaded of all temporal calamities. Your Parliament, to their immortal honor be it mentioned, in an ingenious mind have exerted their utmost abilities to put a final stop to so iniquitous a business as the slave trade is. That they have not succeeded in their laudable endeavors was not their fault, but they were defeated by his late excellency only. Now, if you are sensible that slavery is in itself and in its consequences a great evil, why will you not pity and relieve the poor, distressed, enslaved Africans, who, though they are entitled to the same natural rights of mankind that you are nevertheless groaning in bondage? To them a shocking consideration indeed, though too little, I fear, thought of by most of you who enjoy the profits of their labor. Would you desire the preservation of your own liberty? As the first step, let the oppressed Africans be liberated. Then, and not till then, may you, with confidence and consistency of conduct, look to heaven for a blessing on your endeavors, and knock the shackles with which your taskmasters are hampering you from your own feet. On the other hand, if you are still determined to harden your hearts and turn a deaf ear to our complaints and the calls of God in your present calamities, only to be pleased to collect the miserable end of Pharaoh in a consequence of his refusal to set those at liberty whom he had unjustly reduced to cruel servitude. Sylvanus Wood, former Minuteman, deposition taken at Middlesex, Massachusetts on June 17, 1826. I, Sylvanus Wood, of Woburn, in the county of Middlesex and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, aged 74 years, do testify and say that on the morning of the 19th of April, 1775, I was an inhabitant of Woburn, that about an hour before the break of day on said morning, I heard the Lexington bell ring, and fearing there was difficulty there, I immediately arose, took my gun, and with Robert Douglas went in haste to Lexington, which was about 3 miles distant. The company had gathered around the captain at the hearing of the drum, where we stood, which was about halfway between the meeting house and Buckman's tavern. Parker says to his men, "Every man of you who is equipped, follow me, and those of you who are not equipped, go into the meeting house and furnish yourselves from the magazine, and immediately join the company." I perceived that British troops had arrived on the spot between the meeting house and Buckman's, near where Captain Parker stood when he first led off his men. The British troops approached us rapidly in platoons, with a general officer on horseback at their head. The officer then swung his sword and said, "Lay down your arms, you damned rebels, or you are all dead men. Fire!" Some guns were fired by the British at us from the first platoon, but no person was killed or hurt, being probably charged only with powder. Just at this time, Captain Parker ordered every man to take care of himself. The company immediately dispersed, and while the company was dispersing and leaving over the wall, the second platoon of the British fired and killed some of our men. Diary of Reverend William Emerson, present at the Battle of Concord Bridge, April 19, 1775. In the meantime, the guard set by the enemy to secure the pass at the North Bridge were alarmed by the approach of our people, who had retreated, and were now advancing with special orders not to fire upon the troops unless fired upon. These orders were so punctually observed that we received the fire of the enemy in 3 several and separate discharges of their pieces, before it was returned by our commanding officer. The firing then soon became general for several minutes, in which skirmish 2 were killed on each side, and several of the enemy wounded. It may here be observed, by the way, that we were the more cautious to prevent beginning a rupture with the king's troops, as we were then uncertain what had happened at Lexington, and knew not that they had begun the quarrel there by first firing upon our people and killing 8 men upon the spot. Anonymous letter from New Jersey, 1775. On the 6th of December at Quibbletown, Middlesex County, New Jersey, Thomas Randolph, who had publicly proved himself an enemy to his country, and he being adjudged a person of no consequence enough for a severer punishment, was ordered to be stripped naked, well coated with tar and feathers, and carried in a wagon publicly round the town, which punishment was accordingly inflicted. And as soon as he became duly sensible of his offense, for which he earnestly begged pardon, and promised to atone as far as he was able by a contrary behavior for the future, he was released and suffered to return to his house in less than half an hour. Statement given to Samuel Kirkland, missionary to the Oneida Indians, signed by 12 chief warriors of the Oneida, June 19, 1775. We more immediately address you, our brother, the governor, and the chiefs of New England. Brothers, we have heard of the unhappy differences and great contention between you and the old England. Brothers, possess your minds in peace respecting us Indians. The quarrel seems to be unnatural. You are 2 brothers of one blood. We are unwilling to join either side in such a contest, for we bear an equal affection for both of you, Old and New England. Should the great King of England apply to us for our aid, we shall deny him. If the colonies apply, we will refuse. The present situation of you 2 brothers is new and strange to us. We Indians cannot find nor recollect in the traditions of our ancestors the like case or a similar instance. Brothers, as we have declared for peace, we desire you will not apply to our Indian brethren in New England for their assistance. Let us Indians be all of one mind, and live in peace with one another, and you white people settle your own disputes betwixt yourselves. Proclamation of the Earl of Dunmore, Britain's Governor-General of the Colony of Virginia, November 7, 1775. As I have ever entertained hopes that an accommodation might have taken place between Great Britain and this colony, without being compelled by my duty to this most disagreeable but now absolutely necessary step, rendered so by a body of armed men unlawfully assembled, firing on His Majesty's tenders, and the formation of an army, and that army now on their march to attack His Majesty's troops and destroy the well-disposed subjects of this colony. To defeat such unreasonable purposes, and that all such traitors and their abettors may be brought to justice, I have thought fit to issue this my proclamation, hereby declaring that until the aforesaid good purposes can be obtained, I do, in virtue of the power and authority to me given by His Majesty, determine to execute martial law and cause the same to be executed throughout this colony. And I do hereby further declare all indentured servants, Negroes, or others appertaining to rebels, free that are able and willing to bear arms, they joining His Majesty's troops as soon as may be, for the more speedily reducing this colony to a proper sense of their duty to His Majesty's crown and dignity. Common Sense, a pamphlet published by Thomas Paine, January 10, 1776. In the following pages, I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense, and have no other preliminaries to settle with the reader than that he will divest himself of prejudice and prepossession, and suffer his reason and his feelings to determine for themselves. Volumes have been written on the subject of the struggle between England and America. Men of all ranks have embarked in the controversy from different motives and with various designs, but all have been ineffectual, and the period of debate is closed. Arms, as the last resource, decide the contest. The appeal was the choice of the king, and the continent has accepted the challenge. The sun never shined on a cause of greater worth. It is not the affair of a city, a county, a province, or a kingdom, but of a continent, of at least 1/8 part of the habitable globe. It is not the concern of a day, a year, or an age. Posterity are virtually involved in the contest, and will be more or less affected, even to the end of time, by the proceedings now. But the most powerful of all arguments is that nothing but independence, i.e. a continental form of government, can keep the peace of the continent and preserve it inviolate from civil wars. I dread the event of a reconciliation with Britain now, as it is more than probable that it will be followed by a revolt somewhere or other, the consequences of which may be far more fatal than all the malice of Britain. Thousands are already ruined by British barbarity. Thousands more will probably suffer the same fate. Those men have other feelings than us who have nothing suffered. All they now possess is liberty. What they have before enjoyed is sacrifice to its service, and having nothing more to lose, they disdain submission. A government of our own is our natural right, and when a man seriously reflects on the precariousness of human affairs, he will become convinced that it is infinitely wiser and safer to form a constitution of our own in a cool, deliberate manner, while we have it in our power, than to trust such an interesting event to time and chance. To conclude, however strange it may appear to some, or however unwilling they may be to think so, matters not, but many strong and striking reasons may be given to show that nothing can settle our affairs so expeditiously as an open and determined declaration for independence. These proceedings may at first appear strange and difficult, but, like all other steps which we have already passed over, will in a little time become familiar and agreeable. And until an independence is declared, the continent will feel itself like a man who continues pushing off some unpleasant business from day to day, yet knows it must be done, hates to set about it, wishes it over, and is continually haunted with the thoughts of its necessity. Letter Abigail Adams to John Adams, March 31st, 1776. I long to hear that you have declared an independency, and by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies, and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Do not put such unlimited power into the hands of the husbands. Remember, all men would be tyrants if they could. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. John Adams to Abigail Adams, April 14th, 1776. As to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh. We have been told that our struggle has loosened the bands of government everywhere, that children and apprentices were disobedient, that schools and colleges were grown turbulent, that Indians slighted their guardians, and Negroes grew insolent to their masters. But your letter was the first intimation that another tribe, more numerous and powerful than all the rest of them, were grown discontented. This is rather too coarse a compliment, but you are so saucy, I won't blot it out. Depend upon it, we know better than to repeal our masculine systems. Although they are in full force, you know they are little more than theory. We dare not exert our power in its full latitude. We are obliged to go fair and softly, and in practice you know we are the subjects. We have only the name of masters, and rather than give up this, which would completely subject us to the despotism of the petticoat, I hope General Washington and all our brave heroes would fight. Abigail Adams to John Adams, May 7th, 1776. I cannot say that I think you very generous to the ladies, for whilst you are proclaiming peace and goodwill to men, emancipating all nations, you insist upon retaining an absolute power over wives. But you must remember that arbitrary power is like most other things which are very hard, very liable to be broken. And notwithstanding all your wise laws and maxims, we have it in our power, not only to free ourselves, but to subdue our masters, and without violence throw both your natural and legal authority at our feet. Official Journals of the Continental Congress, Philadelphia, May 10, 1776. The Congress then resumed the consideration of the report from the Committee on the Whole, which being read was agreed to as follows. Resolved that it be recommended to the respective assemblies and conventions of the United Colonies, where no government sufficient to the exigencies of their affairs have been hitherto established, to adopt such government as shall, in the opinion of the representatives of the people, best conduce to the happiness and safety of their constituents in particular, and America in general. Resolved that a committee of 3 be appointed to prepare a preamble to the foregoing resolution. Mr. John Adams, Mr. Edward Rutledge, and Mr. Richard Henry Lee. Continental Congress, May 15, 1776. The Congress took into consideration the draft of the preamble brought in by the committee, which was agreed to as follows. Whereas His Britannic Majesty, in conjunction with the Lords and Commons of Great Britain, has by a late Act of Parliament excluded the inhabitants of these United Colonies from the protection of his crown, and whereas no answer whatever to the humble petitions of the colonies for the redress of grievances and reconciliation with Great Britain has been or is likely to be given, and it is necessary that the exercise of every kind of authority under the said crown should be totally suppressed, and that all the powers of government exerted under the authority of the people of the colonies for the preservation of internal peace, virtue, and good order, as well as for the defense of their lives, liberties, and properties against the hostile invasions and cruel depredations of their enemies. The several matters to this day referred being postponed, adjourned to 10 o'clock tomorrow. Account of Thomas Jefferson of the process of finalizing the Declaration of Independence, drawn from his papers. The committee for drawing the Declaration of Independence desired me to do it. It was accordingly done, and being approved by them, I reported it to the House on Friday, the 28th of June, when it was read and ordered to lie on the table. Congress proceeded to consider the Declaration of Independence, which had been reported and laid on the table the Friday preceding, and on Monday referred to a committee of the whole. The pusillanimous idea that we had friends in England worth keeping terms with still haunted the minds of many. For this reason, those passages which conveyed censures on the people of England were struck out, lest they should give them offense. The clause, too, reprobating the enslaving the inhabitants of Africa was struck out in complaisance to South Carolina and Georgia, who had never attempted to restrain the importation of slaves, and who, on the contrary, still wished to continue it. Our northern brethren also, I believe, felt a little tender under those censures, for though their people have very few slaves themselves, yet they had been pretty considerable carriers of them to others. The debates, having taken up the greater parts of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th days of July, were, in the evening of the last, closed. The declaration was reported by the committee, agreed to by the House, and signed by every member present, except Mr. Dickinson. In Congress, July 4th, 1776, a declaration by the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled. When, in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent be obtained, and when so suspended he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing, with manly firmness, his invasions on the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time after such dissolutions to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges dependent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule in these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is at this time transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy, scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections among us, and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We've reminded them of the circumstances of our emigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them, as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are, and of right ought to be, free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of the divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Signed by order and in behalf of the Congress, John Hancock, President. Pamphlet submitted by Samuel Hopkins, minister, circulated to all members of the Continental Congress, 1776. To the honorable members of the Continental Congress, representatives of the 13 United American Colonies, we naturally look to you in behalf of more than 1 million of persons in these colonies who are under such a degree of oppression and tyranny as to be wholly deprived of all civil and personal liberty, to which they have as good a right as any of their fellow men, and are reduced to the most abject state of bondage and slavery without any just cause. We have particular encouragement thus to apply to you, since you have had the honor and happiness of leading these colonies to resolve to stop the slave trade and to buy no more slaves imported from Africa. We have satisfaction of the best assurances that you have not done this merely from political reasons, but from a conviction of the unrighteousness and cruelty of that trade and a regard to justice and benevolence. Deeply sensible of the inconsistence of promoting the slavery of the Africans at the same time as we are asserting our own civil liberty at the risk of our fortunes and our lives. This leaves in our minds no doubt that your wisdom and the great influence you have in these colonies will be so properly and effectually exerted as to bring about a total abolition of slavery in such a manner as shall greatly promote the happiness of these oppressed strangers and the best interest of the public. May you judge the poor of the people and save the children of the needy, relieve the oppressed, and deliver the spoiled out of the hand of the oppressor, and be the happy instruments of procuring and establishing universal liberty to white and black, to be transmitted down to the latest posterity. Letter from Henry Laurens, South Carolina delegate to the Continental Congress, a slave owner and participant in the slave trade, to his son John Laurens, August 14, 1776. My Negroes, all to a man, are strongly attached to me. Hitherto not one of them has attempted to desert. These Negroes were first enslaved by the English. Acts of Parliament have established the slave trade in favor of the home-residing English, and almost totally prohibited the Americans from reaping any share of it. Men of war, forts, castles, governors, companies, and committees are employed and authorized by the English Parliament to protect, regulate, and extend the slave trade. What meanness, what complicated wickedness appears in this scene. O England, how changed, how fallen. You know, my dear son, I abhor slavery. I was born in a country where slavery had been established by British kings and parliaments, as well as by the laws of that country ages before my existence. Not less than 20,000 pounds sterling would all my Negroes produce if sold at auction tomorrow. I am not the man who enslaved them. They are indebted to Englishmen for their favor. Nevertheless, I am devising means for manumitting many of them, and for cutting off the entrail of slavery. What will my children say if I deprive them of so much estate? I will do as much as I can in my time, and leave the rest to a better hand. Letter from Thomas Rodney, Continental Army officer, to his brother Caesar Rodney, December 30th, 1776. The enemy have fled before us in the greatest panic that was ever known. We heard this moment that they have fled from Princeton, and that they are hard pressed by Washington. Never were men in higher spirits than our whole army is. None are sick, and all are determined to extirpate them from the Jersey. But I believe the enemy's fears will do it before we get up with them. The Hessians, from the general to the common soldier, curse and imprecate the war, and swear they were sent here to be slaughtered, that they will never leave New York again till they sail for Europe. Jersey will be the most Whiggish colony on the continent. The very Quakers declare for taking up arms. You cannot imagine the distress of this country. They have stripped everybody almost without distinction, even all of their clothes, and have beat and abused men, women, and children in the most cruel manner ever heard of. Let's take a brief break. If you'd like to know how to support my work, there are a couple of different ways. I have a Ko-Fi link, which is in the description. You can make a one-time donation, any amount you like, and everything, even a small amount, is very much appreciated. One thing you could do to support me is to buy one of my books. I've written several books available on Amazon, usually Kindle, and paperback versions. Most are fiction. I write in a couple of different genres, including crime, mystery, and science fiction. In 2024, I put out a mystery called Daniel Vanished. In 1991, Daniel, a young man from coastal Oregon on a road trip to Las Vegas, walks out of a hotel room at Bally's on the Sunset Strip, now known as the Horseshoe, and is never seen again. Over 30 years later, after poor Daniel's bones are found in a desolate spot in the Nevada desert, his former childhood friend hears an episode of a true crime podcast about the case, gets angry about the inaccuracies, and reaches out to the podcaster. The two of them go on their own road trip across the desert Southwest to try to solve Daniel's disappearance. It's a fun book, and I think you'll like it. Links to my books are also in the description. You could also support me by taking one of my online courses on my website, seanmunger.com. I have classes on Putin. There he is again. Stop ruining my videos, Vlad. There's an audio course on the history of conspiracy theories in America, and a very in-depth class on the lead-up and background to the events of September 11th, 2001. If you can't do anything financially, which is fine, there are some free courses on my site as well. My Pearl Harbor course has been going 5 years now and is still my most popular course. It's absolutely free. I also have one on the history and legend of the Holy Grail. There's also a members section on this channel where you can see ad-free and expanded versions of my recent videos, including this one. Thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. Now let's get back to the American Revolution era. Deposition of Samuel Woodruff, Connecticut militia, written down in 1832, describing the Battle of Freeman's Farm, part of the Saratoga Campaign of October, 1777. A regiment of the Royal Grenadiers, with the brave Major Ackland at their head, in conducting the retreat, came to a small cultivated field enclosed by a fence. Here they halted, formed, and made a stand, apparently determined to retrieve what they had lost by their repulse at the redoubts and commencement of the action. They placed in their center and at each flank a strong battery of brass field pieces. Carnage became frightful, but the conflict was of short duration. The gallant major received a musket ball through both legs, which placed him hors de combat. Retreat immediately ensued, leaving their killed and wounded with 2 brass field pieces on the ground. Ackland, leaning upon a stump of a tree in the corner of the fence, was made prisoner by Adjutant General Wilkinson and his servant, who were passing by. They dismounted from their horses and, placing the major on the servant's horse, sent him to General Gates's headquarters to have his wounds dressed. On the cleared field already mentioned, and within the compass of a quarter of an acre of ground, we found and assisted to bury between 20 and 30 dead bodies of the Royal Grenadiers. The brigade in which this term of service was performed was commanded by General Oliver Wolcott. Message from American diplomats, including Benjamin Franklin, to the French court in Paris, December 8, 1777. The commissioners from the Congress of the United States of America beg leave to represent to your excellency that it is near a year since they had the honor of putting into your hands the propositions of the Congress for a treaty of amity and commerce with this kingdom, to which, with sundry other propositions contained in subsequent memorials, requesting the aid of ships of war and offering engagements to unite the forces of said states with those of France and Spain in acting against the dominions of Great Britain. The commissioners conceived that, the present circumstances considered, completing such a treaty at this time would have the most happy effect in raising the credit of the United States abroad and strengthening their resolutions at home. The aid of ships desired might at this juncture be employed to great advantage in America, which, when honored with a conference, they could more particularly explain. They also pray that their grateful acknowledgments may be presented to the King of the additional aid of 3 millions, which he has been so graciously pleased to promise them. A secure increase of the commerce, wealth, and strength of France and Spain will be one consequence of their success in this contest, and we wish for nothing so much after establishing their own liberty as a firm and everlasting union with these nations. American ministers Ben Franklin, Silas Deane, and Arthur Lee reporting to Congress from Passy, France, December 18, 1777. We received your dispatches of October 6th from Yorktown. They came to us by a packet from Boston, which brought the great news of Burgoyne's defeat and surrender, news that apparently occasioned as much general joy in France as if it had been a victory of their own troops over their own enemies. Such is the universal warm and sincere goodwill and attachment to us and our cause in this nation. Monsieur Girard, one of the secretaries, came yesterday to inform us, by order of the King, that after long and full consideration of our affairs and propositions in council, it was decided, and His Majesty was determined, to acknowledge our independence and make a treaty with us of amity and commerce. That His Majesty was fixed in his determination not only to acknowledge but to support our independence by every means in his power. That in doing so he might probably soon be engaged in war, with all the expenses, risk, and damage usually attending it. Yet he should not expect any compensation from us on that account, nor pretend that he acted wholly for our sakes, since besides his real goodwill to us and our cause, it was manifestly the interest of France that the power of England should be diminished by our separation from it. Diary of Dr. Albigence Waldo, a physician with the Continental Army, camped at Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. December 12, 1777. I am sick, discontented, and out of humor. Poor food, hard lodging, cold weather, fatigue, nasty clothes, nasty cookery, vomit half my time, smoked out of my senses. The devil's in it. I can't endure it. Why are we sent here to starve and freeze? What sweet felicities I have left at home. Charming wife, pretty children, good beds, good food, good cookery. Here, all confusion, smoke, and cold, hunger, and filthiness. A pox on my bad luck. There comes a bowl of beef soup full of burnt leaves and dirt, sickish enough to make a Hector spew. Away with it, boys. I'll live like the chameleon upon air. December 21st. Preparations made for huts. Provisions scarce. Sent a letter to my wife. Heartily wish myself at home. My skin and eyes are almost spoiled with continual smoke. A general cry throughout the camp this evening among the soldiers. No meat, no meat. What have you had for your dinners, boys? Nothing but fire, cake, and water, sir. At night. Gentlemen, the supper is ready. What is your supper, lads? Fire, cake, and water, sir. December 22nd. Lay excessive cold and uncomfortable last night. My eyes are started out from their orbits like a rabbit's eyes, occasioned by a great cold and smoke. What have you got for breakfast, lads? Fire, cake, and water, sir. The Lord send that our commissary of purchases may live on fire, cake, and water till their glutted guts are turned to pasteboard. The Earl of Carlisle, Special British Envoy to the Continental Congress, message to Henry Laurent, New York City, June 13, 1778. Gentlemen, with an earnest desire to stop the further effusion of blood and calamities of war, we communicate to you with the least possible delay after our arrival in this city a copy of the communication on which His Majesty is pleased to honor us. We are disposed to concur in every satisfactory and just arrangement towards the following, among other purposes: to consent to a cessation of hostilities both by sea and land, to restore free intercourse, to revive mutual affection, and restore the common benefits of naturalization through the several parts of this empire, to agree that no military force shall be kept up in the different states of North America without the consent of the General Congress or of particular assemblies, to perpetuate our union by a reciprocal deputation of an agent or agents from the different states, who shall have the privilege of a seat and voice in the Parliament of Great Britain, or, if sent from Britain, to have in that case a seat and voice in the assemblies of the different states to which they may be deputed respectively. In short, to establish the power of the respective legislatures in each particular state, to settle its revenue, its civil and military establishment, and to exercise a perfect freedom of legislation and internal government, so that the British states throughout North America, acting with us in peace and war, under our common sovereign, may have the irrevocable enjoyment of every privilege that is short of a total separation of interest, or consistent with that union of force on which the safety of our common religion and liberty depends. Henry Lawrence's reply to the Earl of Carlisle, June 17, 1778. I have received the letter from your excellencies with the enclosures and laid them before Congress. The acts of the British Parliament, the commission from your sovereign, and your letter suppose the people of these states to be subjects of the Crown of Great Britain, and are founded on the idea of dependence, which is utterly inadmissible. Congress are inclined to peace. They will therefore be ready to enter upon the consideration of a treaty of peace and commerce, not inconsistent with the treaties already subsisting, when the King of Great Britain shall demonstrate a sincere disposition for that purpose. The only solid proof of this disposition will be an explicit acknowledgment of the independence of these states, or the withdrawing of his fleets and armies. Written order, George Washington, Commander of the Continental Army, to General John Sullivan, May 31st, 1779. Sir, the expedition you are appointed to command is to be directed against the hostile tribes of the 6 nations of Indians, with their associates and adherents. The immediate objects are the total destruction and devastation of their settlements and the capture of as many prisoners of every age and sex as possible. It will be essential to ruin their crops now in the ground and prevent their planting more. I beg leave to suggest as general rules that ought to govern your operations, to make rather than receive attacks, attended with as much impetuosity, shouting, and noise as possible, and to make the troops act in as loose and dispersed a way as is consistent with a proper degree of government concert and mutual support. It should be previously impressed upon the minds of the men, whenever they have an opportunity, to rush on with the war whoop and fixed bayonet. Nothing will disconcert and terrify the Indians more than this. After you have very thoroughly completed the destruction of their settlements, if the Indians should show a disposition for peace, I would have you to encourage it, on condition that they will give some decisive evidence of their sincerity by delivering up some of the principal instigators of their past hostility into our hands. But you will not by any means listen to any overture of peace before the total ruin of their settlements is effected. I have the highest expectation of success equal to our wishes, and I beg leave to assure you that I anticipate with great pleasure the honor which will redound to yourself and the advantage to the common cause from a happy termination of this important enterprise. Account of a soldier serving under Continental Army Colonel David Brodhead on an expedition along the Allegheny River in Pennsylvania, September 1779. Colonel Brodhead, who commanded a party from Fort Pitt, has penetrated the Indian country lying on the Allegheny River, 180 miles, burnt 10 of the Mingo, Muncie, and Seneca towns in that quarter, containing 165 houses, and destroyed all the fields of corn, computed to be 500 acres, with the only loss on our side 3 men slightly wounded. 43 of their warriors were met by Lieutenant Harding and an advance party of 22 men, who attacked the savages and routed them, killed 5 on the spot, and took all their canoes and blankets. In the midst of these defiles, our advance party, consisting of 15 white men and 8 Delawares, discovered between 30 and 40 warriors landing from their canoes, who, having also seen part of our troops, immediately stripped themselves and prepared for action. Lieutenant Harding, who commanded our advance, disposed his men in a semicircular form and began the attack with such irresistible fury, tomahawk in hand, that the savages could not long sustain the charge, but fled with the utmost horror and precipitation, some plunging themselves into the river. We proceeded to their towns with the utmost dispatch, which we found at the distance of about 20 miles further, with extensive cornfields on both sides of the river, and deserted by the inhabitants upon our approach. 8 towns we set in flames and committed their war posts to the river. The corn, and amounting in whole to near 600 acres, was our next object, which in 3 days we cut down and piled into heaps without the least interruption from our enemy. After burning the old towns of Caughnawago and Mahuasquatchincoken, we arrived at Pittsburgh the 14th instant with the scalps we had taken and $3,000 worth of plunder, having in the course of 33 days completed a march of near 400 miles through a country the Indians had hitherto thought impenetrable by us. Act by the Pennsylvania Legislature, March 1st, 1780. When we contemplate our abhorrence of that condition to which the arms and tyranny of Great Britain were exerted to reduce us, when we look back on the variety of dangers to which we have been exposed, we rejoice that it is in our power to extend a portion of that freedom to others which hath been extended to us. Be it enacted, and it is hereby enacted, by representatives of the freemen of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, that all persons, as well as Negroes and mulattoes and others, who shall be born within this state, from and after the passing of this act, shall not be deemed and considered as servants for life or slaves, and that all servitude for life or slavery of children, in consequence of the slavery of their mothers, in the case of all children born within this state, from and after the passing of this act, shall be, and hereby is, utterly taken away, extinguished, and forever abolished. Provided always that every Negro or mulatto child born within this state after the passing of this act, as aforesaid, who would, in case this act had not been made, have been born a servant for years, or life, or a slave, shall be deemed the servant of such person, or his or her assigns, who would in such case have been entitled to the service of such child, until such child shall attain unto the age of 28 years. No man or woman of any nation or color shall at any time hereafter be deemed, adjudged, or holden within the territories of this Commonwealth as slaves or servants for life, but as free men and free women, except the domestic slaves attending upon delegates in Congress from the other American states. Anonymous Writer, The Sentiments of an American Woman, printed in Philadelphia, 1780. On the commencement of actual war, the women of America manifested a firm resolution to contribute as much as could depend on them to the deliverance of their country. Animated by the purest patriotism, they are sensible of sorrow at this day in not offering more than barren wishes for the success of so glorious a revolution. They aspire to render themselves really more useful, and this sentiment is universal from the North to the South of the 13 United States. Born for liberty, disdaining to bear the irons of a tyrannic government, we associate ourselves to the grandeur of those sovereigns, cherished and revered, who have held with so much splendor the scepter of the greatest states, the Batildas, the Elizabeths, the Maries, the Catherines, who have extended the empire of liberty, and contented to reign by sweetness and justice, have broken the chains of slavery forged by tyrants in times of ignorance and barbarity. We are at least certain that he cannot be a good citizen who will not applaud our efforts for the relief of the armies which defend our lives, our possessions, our liberty. Who amongst us will not renounce with the highest pleasure those vain ornaments when she shall consider that the valiant defenders of America will be able to draw some advantage for the money which she may have laid out in these? The time is arrived to display the same sentiments which animated us at the beginning of the Revolution, when we renounced the use of teas rather than receive them from our persecutors, when our republican and laborious hands spun the flax, prepared the linen intended for the use of our soldiers, when as exiles and fugitives we supported with courage all the evils which are concomitants of war. General George Washington. Circular to the 13 states, written from Bergen County, New Jersey, August 27, 1780. I am under the disagreeable necessity of informing you that the army is again reduced to an extremity of distress for want of provision. The greater part of it had been without meat from the 21st to the 26th. Military coercion is no longer of any avail, as nothing further can possibly be collected from the country in which we are obliged to take a position without depriving the inhabitants of the last morsel. It has been no inconsiderable support of our cause to have had it in our power to contrast the conduct of our army with that of the enemy, and to convince the inhabitants that while their rights were wantonly violated by the British troops, by ours they were respected. This distinction must unhappily now cease, and we must assume the odious character of the plunderers instead of the protectors of the people, the direct consequence of which must be to alienate their minds from the army and insensibly from the cause. Without a speedy change of circumstances, this dilemma will be involved. Either the army must disband, or what is, if possible, worse, subsist upon the plunder of the people. Although the troops have upon every occasion hitherto borne their wants with unparalleled patience, it will be dangerous to trust too often to repetition of the causes of discontent. Petition of Moses Hall, North Carolina militiamen, describing the Battle of Haw River in North Carolina, February 1781. This document was dictated around 1835. The evening after our battle with the Tories, we having a considerable number of prisoners, I recollect a scene which made a lasting impression on my mind. I was invited by some of my comrades to go and see some of the prisoners. We went to where 6 were standing together. Some discussion taking place, I heard some of our men cry, "Remember Buford," and the prisoners were immediately hewed to pieces with broadswords. At first I bore the scene without any emotion, but upon a moment's reflection I felt such horror as I never did before, nor have since, and returning to my quarters and throwing myself upon my blanket, I contemplated the cruelties of war, from which I was not relieved until commencing our march next morning before day by moonlight. I came to Tarleton's camp, which he had just abandoned, leaving lively rail fires. Being on the left of the road as we marched along, I discovered lying upon the ground something with the appearance of a man. Upon approaching him, he proved to be a youth about 16, who, having come out to view the British through curiosity, for fear he might give information to our troops, they had run him through with a bayonet and left him for dead. Though able to speak, he was mortally wounded. The sight of this unoffending boy, butchered rather than be encumbered on the march, I assume, relieved me of my distressful feelings for the slaughter of the Tories, and I desired nothing so much as the opportunity of participating in their destruction. Letter from Lord Cornwallis, British commander in the Southern Theater, to Major General William Phipps, Wilmington, North Carolina, April 10, 1781. I have had a most difficult and dangerous campaign, and was obliged to fight a battle 200 miles away from my communication against an enemy 7 times my number. We had not a regiment or corps that did not at some time give way. It ended, however, happily, in our completely routing the enemy and taking their cannon. The idea of our friends rising in any number and to any purpose totally failed, as I expected, and here I am getting rid of my wounded and refitting my troops at Wilmington. Now, my dear friend, what is our plan? Without one we cannot succeed, and I assure you that I am quite tired of marching about the country in quest of adventures. If we mean an offensive war in America, we must abandon New York and bring our whole force into Virginia. If our plan is defensive, mixed with desultory expeditions, let us quit the Carolinas, which cannot be held defensively, while Virginia could be so easily armed against us, and stick to our salt pork at New York, sending now and then a detachment to steal tobacco. I daily expect 3 regiments from Ireland. Leaving one of them at Charleston, with the addition of the other 2 and the flank companies, I can come by land to you. But whether after we have joined we shall have a sufficient force for a war of conquest, I should think very doubtful. By a war of conquest, I mean to possess the country sufficiently to overturn the rebel government, and to establish a militia and some kind of mixed authority of our own. I have as yet received no orders. It is very difficult to get any letters conveyed by land on account of the vigilance and severity of the rebel government. The Articles of Confederation, adopted by the Second Continental Congress, November 15, 1777, ratified March 1, 1781. The style of this confederacy shall be the United States of America. Each state retains its sovereignty, freedom, and independence, and every power, jurisdiction, and right which is not by this confederation expressly delegated to the United States in Congress assembled. The said states hereby severally enter into a firm league of friendship with each other for their common defense, the security of their liberties, and their mutual and general welfare, binding themselves to assist each other against all force offered to or attacks made upon them, or any of them, on account of religion, sovereignty, trade, or any other pretense whatever. The United States in Congress assembled shall never engage in a war, nor grant letters of marque or reprisal in time of peace, nor enter into any treaties or alliances, nor coin money, nor regulate the value thereof, nor ascertain the sums and expenses necessary for the defense and welfare of the United States, nor appoint a commander-in-chief of the army or navy, unless 9 states assent to the same. Nor shall a question on any other point, except for adjourning from day to day, be determined, unless by the votes of the majority of the United States in Congress assembled. All bills of credit emitted, monies borrowed, and debts contracted by or under the authority of Congress before the assembling of the United States in pursuance of the present Confederation shall be deemed and considered as a charge against the United States, for payment and satisfaction whereof the said United States and the public faith are hereby solemnly pledged. Deposition of Sarah Osborne, a cook and washerwoman for the Continental Army who was present at the Battle of Yorktown in October 1781. The deposition was taken in 1837. They marched immediately for a place called Williamsburg, as she thinks, alternately on horseback and on foot. There arrived, they remained 2 days till the army all came in by land, and then marked for Yorktown, or Little York as it was then called. Deponent took her stand just back of the American tents, say about a mile from the town, and busied herself washing, mending, and cooking for the soldiers, in which she was assisted by the other females. Some men washed their own clothing. She heard the roar of artillery for a number of days. On one occasion, when Deponent was thus employed carrying in provisions, she met General Washington, who asked her if she was not afraid of the cannonballs. She replied, no, the bullets would not cheat the gallows, that it would not do for the men to fight and starve too. They dug entrenchments nearer and nearer to Yorktown every night or two till the last. While digging that, the enemy fired very heavily till about 9 o'clock next morning, then stopped, and the drums from the enemy beat excessively. The drums continued beating, and all at once the officers hurrahed and swung their hats, and Deponent asked them, what is the matter now? One of them replied, are you not soldier enough to know what it means? Deponent replied, no. They then replied, the British have surrendered. Deponent, having provisions ready, carried the same down to the entrenchments that morning, and 4 of the soldiers, whom she was in the habit of cooking for, ate their breakfasts. A petition from unnamed Loyalists in the American states to the British Parliament and King George III, 1782. We, His Majesty's most dutiful and faithful subjects, the loyal inhabitants of America, beg leave, with the deepest humility and reverence, on the present calamitous occasion of public and national misfortune in the surrender of Lord Cornwallis and the army under his lordship's command at Yorktown, humbly to entreat your Majesty and the Parliament would be graciously pleased to permit us to offer this renewed testimony of loyalty and attachment to our most gracious sovereign. There are many more men in His Majesty's provincial regiments than there are in the Continental service. Hence it cannot be doubted but that there are more Loyalists in America than there are rebels, and also that their zeal must be greater, or so many would not have enlisted into the provincial service under such very unequal circumstances. But if compelled by adversity or misfortune, an idea should be formed by Great Britain of relinquishing her American colonies to the usurpation of Congress, we thus solemnly call God to witness that we think the colonies can never be so happy or so free as in a constitutional connection with and dependence on Great Britain. Brutal violence, merciless severity, relentless cruelty, and discretionary outrages are the distinguished traits and ruling principles of the present system of congressional republicanism. Our aversion is unconquerable, irreconcilable. We are attached to monarchical government from past and happy experience, by duty and by choice. We thus humbly implore your Majesty and the Parliament, in pity to our distress, to solicit by your ambassadors at the courts of foreign sovereigns the aid of such powerful and good allies as to your Majesty and Parliament, in your great wisdom and discretion, may seem meet, that they may be permitted to solicit and obtain from other nations that interference, aid, and alliance, which, by the blessing of Almighty God, may in the last fatal and ultimate extreme save and deliver us, His Majesty's American Loyalists, who, we maintain, in every one of the colonies, compose a great majority of the inhabitants. Excerpt from a Parliamentary History of England. Debate in the Commons on Sir James Lowther's motion for putting an end to the American War, December 12, 1781. Sir James Lowther rose to make a previous motion before the House went into a committee to vote the army supplies. It became them, he said, to inquire whether they were to persevere in this war and feed it with more British blood. It had been obstinately, fatally pursued. The country was drained, exhausted, dejected. Their hearts were against it. They considered it a struggle against nature in which everything was to be hazarded and nothing to be got. They must, if they design to do their duty and to discharge their trust to their constituents, come to a specific declaration on the point and put an end to the war by a peremptory resolution. It was for this reason that he recommended to the House to declare, quote, that it is the opinion of this House that the war carried on in the colonies and plantations of North America has proved ineffectual either to the protection of His Majesty's loyal subjects in the said colonies or for defeating the dangerous designs of our enemies. End quote. He called upon gentlemen to recollect that the war in which we were engaged in America was not like a war between two rival or two neighboring states about a barrier or a boundary. It was a war in which every conclusion was against us, in which we had suffered everything without gaining anything. He called upon gentlemen to say if there was still any hopes after the disaster in Virginia, if there was still any disposition in their minds to go on, what ray of hope was not blasted, what prospect had not failed, what object was not abandoned. The country gentlemen who had been deceived from the beginning could be deluded no more. It was time, therefore, for Parliament to interfere and to prevent that total ruin which the measures of administration could not fail to bring on, if they should remain unchecked. Reminiscences of Elizabeth Liechtenstein Johnson, a Loyalist from Georgia, written in 1836. In 1774, the Revolutionary War commenced at Boston and began to spread to the southward. In 76, the people in Georgia were inflamed against the government of Great Britain and were raising a ragged corps of all sorts. If a Tory refused to join the people, he was imprisoned, tarred, and feathered. Our teachers became officers in the rebel army, and everywhere the scum rose to the top. All the public officers under government remained loyal and quit the country, their estates being confiscated and afterwards sold. I was married in Savannah, November 21st, 1779, then 15 and a half years old, my husband, William Martin Johnson, being 25 and a half. My father-in-law was as angry, I fancy, as his mild nature would admit at his son's romantic folly. At New York we landed, and we spent the hot months on Long Island. In October 1780, we left with a fleet and force under command of General Leslie, who was going up the Chesapeake. Just as the poor people came forward to show their loyalty in the hope that the British troops would remain permanently there, suddenly, in the month of November, the General's aide-de-camp, Major Skelly, came to tell Mr. Johnson that the troops would embark next morning. Our poor landlady, a Mrs. Elliot, sat with her head back and her mouth extended, scarce in her senses from the shock, till at last she found speech to articulate, "Well, this is the third time we have been so served by the British. We have shown our loyalty, and they have left us to the rage and persecution of the Americans for doing them service." Diary of David Zeisberger, Moravian missionary, describing an attack by Pennsylvania militia against Lenape and Mohican Indians at Gnadenhütten, now in Ohio. March 7th, 1782. The militia, some 200 in number, as we hear, first came to Gnadenhütten. A mile from the town they met young Shabosh in the bush, whom they at once killed and scalped near the houses. 2 friendly Indians not belonging to us, who had gone there with our people from Sandusky, among whom were several other friends who perished likewise. Our Indians were mostly on the plantations and saw the militia come, but no one thought of fleeing, for they suspected no ill. The militia came to them and bade them come into the town, telling them no harm should befall them. They trusted and went, but were all bound, the men being put into one house, the women into another. They then began to sing hymns and spoke words of encouragement and consolation one to another, until they were all slain. The sisters also afterwards met the same fate, who also sang hymns together. Christina, the Mohican, who well understood German and English, fell upon her knees before the captain, begging for her life, but for answer that he could not help her. 2 well-grown boys, who saw the whole thing and escaped, gave this information. One of these lay under the heaps of slain and was scalped, but finally came to himself and found opportunity to escape. The brethren and the sisters alike were bound, led into town, and slain. They made our Indians bring all their hidden goods out of the bush and then took them away. Prisoners said that the militia themselves acknowledged and confessed they had been good Indians. They prayed and sang until the tomahawks struck into their heads. The boy who was scalped and got away said the blood flowed in streams in the house. They burned the dead bodies together with the houses, which they set on fire. David Cooper, Quaker abolitionist. A serious address to the rulers of America on the inconsistency of their conduct respecting slavery. A pamphlet sent to every member of Congress, February 1783. Now is the time to demonstrate to Europe and to the whole world that America was in earnest and meant what she said, when with peculiar energy and unanswerable reasoning she pled the cause of human nature, and with undaunted firmness insisted that all mankind came from the hand of their Creator, equally free. Let not the world have an opportunity to charge her conduct with a contradiction to her solemn and often repeated declarations, or to say that her sons are not real friends to freedom, that they have been actuated in this awful contest by no higher motive than selfishness and interest. Must not every generous foreigner feel a secret indignation rise in his breast when he hears the language of Americans upon any of their own rights as freemen being in the least infringed, and reflects that these very people are holding thousands and tens of thousands of their innocent fellow men in the most debasing and abject slavery, deprived of every right of freemen except light and air? Does not this forcible reasoning apply equally to Africans? Have we a better right to enslave them and their posterity than Great Britain had to demand 3 pence per pound for an article of luxury we could very well do without? Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." End quote. The very people who make these pompous declarations are slaveholders, and by their legislative conduct only meant to be the rights of white men, not all men, and would seem to verify the observation of an eminent writer: when men talk of liberty, they mean their own liberty, and seldom suffer their thoughts on that point to stray to their neighbors. Few among us are now hardy enough to justify slavery, and yet will not release their slaves. Like hardened sinners, acknowledge their guilt, but to discover no inclination to reform. It is true these convictions have occasioned the release of many slaves, and 2 or 3 states to make some feeble efforts looking that way. But I fear after the sunshine of peace takes place, we have little more to expect, unless the sovereign power is exerted to finish this sin and put an end to this crying transgression. Petition of a Philadelphia synagogue to the Pennsylvania State Legislature, 1783. By the 10th section of the frame of government of this Commonwealth, it is ordered that each member of the General Assembly of Representatives of the freemen of Pennsylvania, before he takes his seat, shall make and subscribe a declaration, which ends in these words: "I do acknowledge the scriptures of the Old and New Testament to be given by divine inspiration," to which is added an assurance that no further or other religious test shall ever hereafter be required of any civil officer or magistrate in this state. Certainly this religious test deprives the Jews of the most eminent rights of freemen, solemnly ascertained to all men who are not professed atheists. Although the Jews in Pennsylvania are but few in number, yet liberty of the people in one country, and declaration of the government thereof, that these liberties are the rights of the people, may prove a powerful attractive to men who live under restraints in another country. A clause in the Constitution which disables them to be elected by their fellow citizens to represent them in assembly is a stigma upon their nation and religion, and is inconsonant with the 2nd paragraph of said Bill of Rights. In the religious books of the Jews, which are or may be in every man's hands, there are no such doctrines or principles established as are inconsistent with the safety and happiness of the people of Pennsylvania, and that the conduct and behavior of the Jews in this and the neighboring states has always tallied with the great designs of the Revolution. They have served, some of them in the Continental Army, some went out in the militia to fight the common enemy. All of them have cheerfully contributed to the support of the militia and of the government of this state. Your memorialists humbly pray that if your honor should think proper to call a convention for revising the Constitution, you would be pleased to recommend this to the notice of that convention. The definitive Treaty of Peace, signed at Paris, September 3rd, 1783. His Britannic Majesty acknowledges the said United States, viz., New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia, to be free, sovereign, and independent states, that he treats with them as such, and for himself, his heirs and successors, relinquishes all claims to the government, propriety, and territorial rights of the same, and every part thereof. It is agreed that Congress shall earnestly recommend it to the legislatures of the respective states to provide for the restitution of all estates, rights, and properties which have been confiscated belonging to real British subjects, and also of the estates, rights, and properties of persons resident in districts in the possession of His Majesty's arms and who have not borne arms against the said United States. The navigation of the river Mississippi from its source to the ocean shall forever remain free and open to the subjects of Great Britain and the citizens of the United States. The solemn ratifications of the present treaty, expedited in good and due form, shall be exchanged between the contracting parties in the space of 6 months or sooner, if possible, to be computed from the day of the signatures of the present treaty. Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom, passed by the Virginia General Assembly, January 16, 1786, principally authored by Thomas Jefferson. Be it enacted by the General Assembly that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burdened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinion in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities. And though we well know that this assembly, elected by the people for the ordinary purposes of legislation only, have no power to restrain the acts of succeeding assemblies, constituted with powers equal to our own, and that therefore to declare this act to be irrevocable would be of no effect in law, yet we are free to declare, and do declare, that the rights hereby asserted are of the natural rights of mankind, and that if any act shall hereafter pass to repeal the present or to narrow its operation, such act shall be an infringement of natural right. Notes on the State of Virginia by Thomas Jefferson, originally published 1786. There must doubtless be an unhappy influence on the manners of our people, produced by the existence of slavery among us. The whole commerce between master and slave is a perpetual exercise of the most boisterous passions, the most unremitting despotism on the one part, and degrading submissions on the other. Our children see this and learn to imitate it, for man is an imitative animal. And with what execration should the statesman be loaded who, permitting one half of the citizens thus to trample on the rights of the other, transforms those into despots and these into enemies, destroys the morals of the one part and the amor patriae of the other. With the morals of the people, their industry is also destroyed, for in a warm climate no man will labor for himself who can make another labor for him. This is so true that of the proprietors of slaves a very small proportion indeed are ever seen to labor. And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are of the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with His wrath? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that His justice cannot sleep forever, that considering numbers, nature, and natural means only a revolution of the wheel of fortune, an exchange of situation is among possible events, that it may become probable by supernatural interference. The Almighty has no attribute which can take side with us in such a contest. But it is impossible to be temperate and to pursue this subject through the various considerations of policy, of morals, of history, natural and civil. We must be contented to hope they will force their way into everyone's mind. I think a change already perceptible since the origin of the present revolution. The spirit of the master is abating, that of the slave rising from the dust, his condition mollifying, the way I hope preparing under the auspices of heaven for a total emancipation, and that this is disposed, in the order of events, to be with the consent of the masters, rather than by their extirpation. Letter, Stephen Mix Mitchell, Congressman from Connecticut, to Jeremiah Wadsworth, January 24, 1787. Whether I am to tell you we have a Congress or no, I cannot tell. The situation of Congress is truly deplorable. No one seems willing to contribute a mite to extricate us from the mire into which we are fallen. I cannot see there remains any necessity for keeping up a representation in Congress in our present situation. All we can possibly do is to recommend, which is an old stale device and no better than the wish of a few individuals relative to public concerns. Our eyes at present are turned toward Massachusetts and expect by Saturday's post to hear of feats of chivalry. We are told that General Lincoln and Mr. Shays are this week to take field to try for the title of Empire in the Field of Mars. Whether good or ill is to be produced, futurity must discover. Letter, James Madison to Edward Pendleton, New York City, February 24, 1787. The only step of moment taken by Congress since my arrival has been a recommendation of the proposed meeting in May for revising the federal articles. In general, I find men of reflection much less sanguine as to the new than despondent as to the present system. Indeed, the present system neither has nor deserves advocates, and if some very strong props are not applied, will quickly tumble to the ground. No money is paid into the public treasury. No respect is paid to the federal authority. Not a single state complies with the requisitions, several pass them over in silence, and some positively reject them. If the approaching convention should not agree on some remedy, I am persuaded that some very different arrangement will ensue. The late turbulent scenes in Massachusetts and infamous ones in Rhode Island have done inexpressible injury to the Republican character in that part of the United States, and a propensity towards monarchy is said to have been produced by it in some leading minds. The bulk of the people will probably prefer the lesser evil of a partition of the Union into 3 more practicable and energetic governments. But though it is a lesser evil, it is so great a one that I hope the danger of it will rouse all the real friends of the Revolution to exert themselves in favor of such an organization of the Confederacy as will perpetuate the Union and redeem the honor of the Republican name. James Madison's Notes from the Constitutional Convention, Philadelphia, August 22nd and 25th, 1787. Mr. Sherman, Connecticut, disapproved of the slave trade. Yet, as the states were now possessed of the right to import slaves, as the public good did not require it to be taken from them, and as it was expedient to have as few objections as possible to the proposed scheme of government, he thought it best to leave the matter as we find it. He observed that the abolition of slavery seemed to be going on in the United States, and that the good sense of the several states would probably by degrees complete it. He urged on the convention the necessity of dispatching its business. Colonel Mason, Virginia. This infernal traffic originated in the avarice of British merchants. The British government constantly checked the attempts of Virginia to put a stop to it. The present question concerns not the importing states alone, but the whole Union. The evil of having slaves was experienced during the late war. Had slaves been treated as they might have been by the enemy, they would have proved dangerous instruments in their hands. Mr. Ellsworth, Connecticut. As he had never owned a slave, could not judge of the effects of slavery on character. He said, however, if it was to be considered in a moral light, we ought to go farther and free those already in the country. As population increases, poor laborers will be so plenty as to render slaves useless. Slavery in time will not be a speck in our country. Provision is already made in Connecticut for abolishing it, and the abolition has already taken place in Massachusetts. As to the danger of insurrections from foreign influence, that will become a motive to kind treatment of the slaves. Mr. Pinckney, South Carolina. If slavery be wrong, it is justified by the example of all the world. He cited the case of Greece, Rome, and other ancient states, the sanction given by France, England, Holland, and other modern states. An attempt to take away the right as proposed will produce serious objections to the Constitution, which he wished to see adopted. Mr. Madison, 20 years will produce all the mischief that can be apprehended from the liberty to import slaves. So long a term will be more dishonorable to the national character than to say nothing about it in the Constitution. The Constitution of the United States, proposed at Philadelphia, September 17, 1787. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states, which may be included within this Union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined by adding to the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. The migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall not be prohibited by the Congress prior to the year 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation, not exceeding $10 for each person. No person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on the claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. Observations on the New Constitution, a pamphlet by a Columbian patriot, later identified as playwright and political pundit Mercy Otis Warren, Boston, 1788. There is no security in the proffered system, either for the rights of conscience or the liberty of the press. Despotism, usually while it is gaining ground, will suffer men to think, say, or write what they please. But when once established, if it is thought necessary to subserve the purposes of arbitrary power, the most unjust restrictions may take place in the first instance, and an imprimatur on the press in the next may silence the complaints and forbid the most decent remonstrances of an injured and oppressed people. The executive and the legislature are so dangerously blended as to give just cause of alarm, and everything relative thereto is couched in such ambiguous terms, in such vague and indefinite expression, as is a sufficient ground without any objection for the reprobation of a system that the authors dare not hazard to a clear investigation. There is no provision by a Bill of Rights to guard against the dangerous encroachments of power in too many instances to be named. The whole Constitution, with very few exceptions, appears a perversion of the rights of particular states and of private citizens. The rights of individuals ought to be the primary object of all government and cannot be too securely guarded by the most explicit declarations in their favor. It is presumed the great body of the people unite in sentiment with the writer of these observations, who most devoutly prays that public credit may rear her declining head and remunerative justice pervade the land. They wish to see the Confederated States bound together by the most indissoluble union, but without renouncing their separate sovereignties and independence and becoming tributaries to a consolidated fabric of aristocratic tyranny. Reasons for Dissent to the Federal Constitution. Editorial by Consider Arms, Malachi Maynard, and Samuel Field, published in the Hampshire Gazette, Northampton, Massachusetts, April 16, 1788. The Honorable Mr. King himself, who was an assistant in forming this Constitution, in discoursing upon the slave trade, was pleased to design it by this epithet, nefarious, which carries with it the idea of something peculiarly wicked and abominable. And indeed, we think it deserving of this and every odious epithet which our language affords, descriptive of the iniquity of it. Establishing this Constitution is, in our opinion, establishing the most ignominious kind of theft, man-stealing, and so heinous and aggravated was this crime considered by one who cannot err that under Jewish theocracy it was punished with death. But we were told by an honorable gentleman who was one of the framers of this Constitution that the two southernmost states absolutely refused to confederate at all, except they might be gratified in this article. What then? The honorable gentleman above named was asked the question, what would be the consequence? Suppose one or two states upon any principle should refuse confederating. His answer was, the consequence is plain and easy. They would be compelled to it, not by force of arms, but all commerce with them would be interdicted, and their property seized in every port they should enter, and by law made forfeit, and this line of conduct would soon reduce them to order. The advocates for the Constitution seem to suppose that this restriction being laid upon Congress for only a term of time is the fair dawning of liberty, that it was a glorious acquisition toward the final abolition of slavery. But how much more glorious would the acquisition have been, was such abolition to take place the first moment the Constitution should be established? We think it most safe to lay before our readers an extract from a certain pamphlet entitled Extracts from the Votes and Proceedings of the American Continental Congress, held at Philadelphia on the 5th of September, 1774. In the 22nd page of this same pamphlet, we find the following paragraph, quote, that we will neither import nor purchase any slave imported after the 1st day of December next, after which we will wholly discontinue the slave trade. End quote. Hence it appears to us unaccountable strange that any person who signed the above resolve should sign the federal Constitution. For do they not hold up to view principles diametrically opposite? Can we suppose that what was morally evil in the year 1774 has become in the year 1788 morally good? We cannot but say the conduct of those who associated in the year 1774 in the manner above, and now appear advocates for this new Constitution, is highly inconsistent, although we find such conduct has the celebrated names of a Washington and an Adams to grace it. Long before we entered upon the business of the convention, we were by some means or other possessed with a notion, and we think from good authority, that great men are not always wise. Letter from Benjamin Banneker, an African-American mathematician, astronomer, and surveyor, to Thomas Jefferson, August 19, 1791. Sir, suffer me to recall to your mind at that time, in which the arms and tyranny of the British Crown were exerted with every powerful effort in order to reduce you to a state of servitude. This, sir, was a time when you clearly saw into the injustice of a state of slavery, and in which you had just apprehensions of the horrors of its condition. It was now that your abhorrence thereof was so excited that you publicly held forth this true and invaluable doctrine, which is worthy to be recorded and remembered in all succeeding ages. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But, sir, how pitiable is it to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind, and of his equal and impartial distribution of these rights and privileges which he hath conferred upon them, that you should at the same time counteract his mercies in detaining by fraud and violence so numerous a part of my brethren, under groaning captivity and cruel oppression, that you should at the same time be found guilty of that most criminal act, which you professedly detested in others, with respect to yourselves. I suppose that your knowledge of the situation of my brethren is too extensive to need a recital here. Neither shall I presume to prescribe methods by which they may be relieved, otherwise than by recommending to you and all others to wean yourselves from those narrow prejudices which you have imbibed with respect to them, and as Job proposed to his friends, put your soul in their souls' stead. Thus shall your hearts be enlarged with kindness and benevolence towards them, and thus shall you need neither the direction of myself or others in what manner to proceed therein. The American Revolution is unfinished. Its failure to resolve many of the great issues that it touched, slavery in the meaning of freedom, the rights and land of Native Americans, the role of women in American society, which promises made by the founders were sincere and which ones weren't, those failures go hand in hand with its many and undeniable successes. As I said at the beginning, there is no one story of the American Revolution, no one interpretation. It doesn't belong to anyone. It is what we, not just Americans, but everyone who believes in liberty, it is what we make of it. And it's not over. Today, in 2025, and the months and years following the making of this video, the words I've presented here will continue to inspire, complicate, unite, and divide us. I hope this video has given you a bit of perspective on this very complex and fascinating topic. If you liked this video, please hit the like button, share it, give it a thumbs up, do all the stuff you normally do for a video you like. Consider joining the members section on my YouTube channel. There you'll find an ad-free version of this video with significant additional material. The sources I used to make this video are listed in credits at the end and also down below in the description. As usual, I want to say that no part of this video, including the research or writing of the script, was done with AI. My novel that came out in December 2024, The Gangster Crown, is available on Amazon Kindle and in paperback. The link to that is in the description. I also teach history classes online at my website, seanmunger.com. And you can sign up for my blog at gardenofmemory.net and get the columns delivered directly to your email. Thank you to all my fans and supporters. And thank you once again for joining me on another journey into the past.